And the way we'd like to start is to invite you to just take a minute and describe how your presence on the school board will make a difference or would have made a difference had you been on the school board the last couple of years.
That's a good question. So I think that I would make a difference on the school board because what I bring is a very broad and deep set of experiences with children, with education policy, with law, and with working directly with students. So what I bring is 20 years of working as an education policy professional, as a child advocate, as a lawyer, as the director of a nonprofit organization that serves young people, and as a parent. So what I would bring and what would be different would be that long breadth of experience and also evaluation experience, because evaluation is something that I have done over many years. And the last thing that I would also add is that I bring a collaborative spirit that I think would be very useful on the board. So having had a long time to bring coalitions together, to bring programs together that bring others to the table.
Perfect segue into the next question, which is that one of your top priorities and areas of expertise is to improve program evaluation.
Absolutely. So
that we can determine what programs are working well and which are not, and then scale those that are working. I've heard you talk about that in these first two debates. But we haven't heard a lot of specifics about how you propose to accomplish that. So in your opinion, what are the 3 or 4 current programs or initiatives that you believe should be the highest priority for evaluation?
3 or 4 programs are the highest priority for evaluation?
Right, because we can't do an evaluation of every program all at once, so we got to make some priorities. So
absolutely.
What would rise to the top for you as needing evaluation the most?
So in order to answer that question, let's think about the things that are most impactful for our students, also that have the most cost implications, and the ones where we could get the most actionable data from evaluating them. So what I would say is that one of the things that's been of concern to me is that we have a huge basket of little programs that happen all over the district that relate to dealing with our achievement gap. And we don't even have a catalog of all of those programs. So putting those together and looking at them as a unit and saying, in terms of the efforts that we are putting forth to address the achievement gap, what are our goals? What are we doing to reach those goals? How are we going to know when we get there? So that's kind of that's not a single program, that's almost a basket of programs. I also think that it would be very useful for us to do some evaluation of our guidance programs. Again, figuring out what are our goals, how do we know that we're getting there, and how can we get some actionable data. Last, I think that it would be helpful to revisit some of the thinking and the studying that's gone around our immersion programs. I'm very supportive, by the way, of foreign language instruction and of immersion, but I think it would be great if we could say, what have we learned so far?
We're going to come back to a couple of those topics a little bit later, but on the program evaluation, the decisions as to which program should take priority, do you view that as a board decision or a superintendent's decision? Is that an administrative decision or is that a policy decision? What programs to evaluate first?
Well, what I think is that it's the board's role to say, here are the goals that we are trying to achieve as a district, and here are our policy objectives. So you need to tell us, superintendent, in consultation with your staff, what you think we are doing that kind of lines up with those goals. So I think that it's more of a kind of seeking out almost the advice of the superintendent to the board, but really it's got to be guided by board policy and board goals.
Okay, and so in the case of the achievement gap, which you've mentioned a couple of times at these functions, at these forums, and the plethora of programs that are taking place in the schools, and I think you especially mentioned the elementary schools, have you seen a program that you particularly felt is a strong program and one that's particularly a weak program? What is your own personal, you've talked about the need for evaluation, but I also assume that you've had enough exposure to some of these programs to have formed your opinions, your own opinion about them.
I've formed some of my opinions on these, absolutely. What I've also done, though, is said that I'm not going to be in a position to get into the weeds of every detail of the programs at the schools, nor as a school board member would that be my role to do. But in terms of some of the things that I have seen, there's a program that we do in partnership with an external nonprofit called Dreamcatchers, which seems to me to be really promising to address some issues at middle school, which is a real emphasis of mine. I'd like to see us do some more work at middle school. That seems to me to be a really impactful program. I'd like to learn more about it. I've also heard some fantastic things about the program with the voluntary transfer families at Walter Hayes. I'm told that the parent engagement component of that program is terrific. I'd like to see some more information about, is that working, and is that something that we could scale to other schools?
Great. At last week's debate, one of the questions, I think it was Jay asked this question, what one program would you identify to be reconsidered or dropped from the district? And your reply was that you couldn't in the moment think of one. And I'm wondering, now that you've had a few days to think about that question, pose it to you again. What one program that's going on in the district do you think should be reconsidered or potentially dropped?
I think that because our district has not given us the kind of evaluation data that we need, it's really hard to know what's going to be most impactful and what's not and what needs to be dropped. What I would say is that my priority is to make sure that when we drop things, that we're dropping things because of the impact on kids or the lack of impact on, so what I mean to say is, if it's a program that is not doing what we need in order to get outcomes for students, that program has to go. Right now, when I look at our budget, I feel like we're very, very lean at this point. We've dropped a lot of things that are unnecessary. Now, what I don't know is how effective some of the programs that we have in place are. And that again goes back to, I'm not going to cut until I actually have data in my hands that's going to show me what the impact is on kids.
But nothing that you can identify that you just think should be reconsidered at this point, based on your knowledge of programs, discussions in the community. There's nothing that you would be elected and you'd go in and say, I'd really like us to put this, on the list to be talked about.
Well, I will say this, that for example, one thing that's been discussed quite a bit is our communications officer. If our communications officer is going to be somebody who's going to help us communicate effectively with our community, make sure that students are better served, parents are better informed, and can be better partners with the district, absolutely. If our communication officer, who seems like a terrific person, is primarily being utilized to take pictures at events and show them at board meetings, I don't know that that's necessarily something that I think is the highest, best use of our dollars.
Sure. So you've made a lot of references, obviously, to your consulting work and with the various very high-profile foundations. So I'm curious if there's something you've observed in all that work, one program that you would like to bring to Palo Alto.
So in some of the work that I've done a tremendous amount of work with community organizers around the country who are working on education reform primarily in inner city schools. And one of the things that I saw there that I thought was just fantastic was working with some youth organizers who were doing something that's called participatory action research. So what it does is it allows young people to craft questions to their peers and to the community on issues that are of deep concern to them. They learn all kinds of research skills, they learn statistical analysis, they learn presentation skills, and they get information that they can then bring to the school or to their larger community in order to affect change in their community. So it gives them skills, and it actually gets to demonstrable results for them in the course of doing their work. So it's kind of a win all around. I was unbelievably impressed by some of the students that I saw.
Mm-hmm. Is this something that you'd want to see at multiple schools or pilot at one school, or how would you go about proposing that such a program be rolled out?
Well, something like that, that's a pilot. I mean, that's something where you'd want to start small, and then you'd want to learn from it, tweak it, and then figure out how to scale it. You look at something. I'm just tossing it out there. If you look at our two high schools, for example, there's a really robust journalism program at Pali. There's good journalism at Gunn as well, but it might be nice to say pilot a program like that at Gunn, because that's something kind of new and exciting and interesting. But I'd be completely open and I'm relatively agnostic about how you'd want to do it.
Got a few budget and finance related questions because those are important issues to talk about. Last night, this subject came up at the forum, and you said that it often looks like we have a lot of money, but we're looking at more students and increased pension costs. And you probably were either at or watched last week's board meeting when there was a report and a discussion about district finances and the budget. And I'm wondering if you believe that that discussion and previous discussions that you've seen at the board level have accurately characterized the district's financial condition and provided transparency to the community of how our finances are.
So I was at that board meeting and I found it very interesting, and I believe that Kathy Mack has done a very good job at presenting the information and calculating the information. What I think is a little more difficult is to really fully understand what the implications are kind of as a policy matter or on the ground, like putting it kind of in a larger context. So what was interesting for me was I went to that board meeting and I heard the presentations. It raised a lot of alarms for me as I saw what looked to me like some ticking time bombs in terms of where things could end up. I then went to a briefing at the district the next day. I believe it was if it wasn't the next day, it was 2 days later, and it seemed like the description of where we were at seemed much less alarming. And it was very difficult for me to understand exactly how to process that information. So making the implications of the budget more understandable to the public, I think, would be a good thing. One thing that I often talk about is the difference between information and intelligence. So you can get a lot of data, but understanding what does it mean, that's one step higher. And I think that we need to be able to make good decisions as board members, and as community members we need to have input. I'd also say that we, as right now I'm talking to you as a community member, I believe that the community members also need to be able to have faith in district staff and in their board to make really good, sound decisions, that they're going to be the ones who are going to be pouring through every single one of those numbers.
So to answer the question, do you feel like the financial condition was accurately and transparently presented then, or not?
I don't think
what you're saying.
Oh, so what I'm saying is I don't think it was inaccurate, but in other words, I feel like we had all the numbers there, but the implications of it were not completely clear to me. So for example, we have pretty substantial reserves. We have a policy that we need those. At the board meeting, it was suggested that we had been dipping into those reserves during the downturn. The next day, it sounded like no, that was not really something that we had done. So in other words, I don't know that it's that we got information that was incorrect. It's more about what do we need? What are those projections? How are those projections going to affect the policy decisions that we make?
Well, and that's what I'm referring to. I'm not suggesting that they gave
right.
that they released incorrect financial information, but the implications of that information were clearly, every member of the school board that spoke on finances spoke in terms of I think you just used the word dire, but the difficult financial challenges that lie ahead. That is not the way some people look at
right.
the district's finances, and I'm curious as to, in your own evaluation of the district's finances, what your opinion is.
So my opinion is that we are heavily reliant on property taxes to fund our school district. Property taxes are going to be very cyclical, and they, to a certain extent, are unpredictable. We also know that as a community-funded district, what used to be called a basic aid district, we've lost a tremendous amount of money. We have not been able to get back any of the fair share contribution that we gave in during the dark times. We know that we have all kinds of new cost shifts from the state with respect to mental health services and pension costs. So I put all those things together and I say, this is a time when we need to be extremely prudent. But we always we always have a very conservative estimate, 2 or 3% for property tax revenue increase, And very frequently, it's significantly higher than that.
Almost always.
And so you want to be prudent, you want to be conservative, you don't want to be Los Altos that ends up giving teachers pink slips, and you want to be, clear, but you don't want to be so conservative that it inhibits you from being able to be a little bold and a little innovative when you need to be.
So what direction would you give then to Kathy Mack in terms of what she should build a budget around? Because what's happening year after year is that we build a budget around a very, very low assumption about property tax revenue increases. We always blow through those with the exception of, I think, 1 or possibly 2 years in the last 15. And then what happens is at the end of the year we have a big surplus that rolls into reserves. So we have reserves just building up as a result of operating at a surplus. So what would be your inclination in terms of how to approach that budgeting process?
I would say 3 different things. I would say 1, let's take a look at some rolling averages and see if maybe we can make that kind of conservative baseline higher based on that rolling average. That would be one thing. The other thing would be being able to the extent that we can, take a really hard-nosed look at what's happening in Sacramento and see if we can do any more kind of predictions about what kinds of additional hits we might take based on what's going on in Sacramento. That's a little bit tricky. But the last thing I would say is let's take a look at what our goals and our vision are as a district and see how that plays into the financial decisions we make. For example, 13th Elementary School, potential loss of revenue from Cubberley. What do we want to do about a potential 4th middle school? Several years down the road, a new high school. We need a vision for what we want and then say, how does that roll into the budgeting that we're going to do? Because we can't keep budgeting conservatively, having revenues, and then coming up on decisions that we need to make and saying, oops, oh my gosh, it's a 3-alarm emergency, we've got to go make a decision about something.
Good. Slight shift, but still dealing with money. As I'm sure you know, we're spending a record amount of money on legal services. This year it'll go over $400,000. Most of that money is being spent to litigate against special education families that are asking for services that the district is opting not to provide. That obviously does not create a very conducive situation for resolving problems when it goes to litigation, and it also costs us a lot of money. How do you feel about that whole picture of the increased legal costs? And at what point do you feel that it would make sense to consider bringing an in-house legal counsel instead of using outside counsel?
So there's a few parts to your question. The first thing is with respect to the special ed families, we need to make sure that as a district, we are able to link arms with our special ed families and make sure that every single special ed student gets the services, not only that they need, that we're morally obliged, kind of morally obligated to give them, but that we're legally obligated to give them. And so we need to make ourselves, the district needs to be a partner with its special ed families. I don't know all of the details of all of the litigation that's going on between special ed families and the district. I have asked on a number of occasions to find out. I've personally asked board members, what kinds of information can you give to the public about what you're spending these legal fees on? What's for compliance? What's for litigation? What's for all these different things? So I think that number one, we need to adopt the posture that we are here to support our special ed families and that we need to give them what they're entitled to under law. Number two, we need to be a whole lot more transparent about what we're spending our money on. And then with respect to the outside counsel versus in-house counsel, what I'd need to find out is whether if with in-house counsel we would have enough expertise across the different issue areas that it would make sense for us to do it. Because as a lawyer, I know that very often you end up hiring different outside counsel for different things, because you're able to kind of, these are the people who do the contracts, and these are the people who do special ed, and these are the people who do facilities. So without knowing exactly how the breakdowns work, I don't know, but I'm absolutely open to the notion of having inside counsel, and it would be useful to know what other comparable districts are doing and what best practices we can find from other districts. The main thing is we shouldn't be in an adversarial posture with our students and families.
Well, it's pretty hard to avoid that when the district forms one impression of what's a family's entitled to, and the family has a different impression. There's always going to be cases that get to that point.
Right.
What has the response been when you've asked board members for an understanding of how these legal fees break out and what they pertain to? What's been the answer?
Not much. I mean, we have some good, solid board members who care about these issues, but I don't know that this kind of breakdown is necessarily a priority for them.
So you didn't get a satisfactory answer?
No, I did not.
Okay.
All right, well, we can pivot. I was going to ask you about Cubberley, with the lease quickly, the expiration days quickly approaching, and all the candidates have expressed support for, moving forward on it and not digging in the district's heels so much. But I'm wondering what your approach would be, with the city council saying that they're not interested in setting aside any more money for the covenant not to develop the 1.8 million that's going to the district currently. So just what your approach would be for that if you were elected.
So Cubberley is a jewel in our city, which is incredibly well situated for us to be able to use for purposes that would be of tremendous value to our students and community. It's deteriorating, and that is just a tragedy for the kids and for the community at large. The very first recommendation from the Citizens Advisory Committee was to have a community needs assessment. We need a professional community needs assessment and decide what's going to be the highest best use of that property. What can we do? And we need to act on it and make some decisions. The game of chicken needs to end, and just saying, well, it's gonna roll forward if we just let it expire. That doesn't seem to me to be leadership.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, a community needs assessment is obviously fine at determining what, in an ideal world, with the entire site available, we would want to use it for. But the impasse here is that the school district has been unwilling to state when it wants Cubberley back. And so the message from the school district is, we can't tell the city when we want to reclaim use of our site. We can't put a year on it. But we want you to continue to lease the site from us for a very high amount of money, way more than the city can get back from subleasing it. So a needs assessment really, I'm not quite sure how you see a needs assessment addressing that problem. Because until the city knows what the school district wants and needs from its part of the property, how can you move forward?
The way you can move forward is you can say, what does our community need in that site, and is it possible to create something that is built to state ed code so that it can be converted to a middle school or a high school when that need arises, and that need is going to arise, and that need's going to arise within, if you look at population projections, which also are notoriously incorrect, but to the best that we can guess, certainly in 10 years we've got to be there. So what I would say is the district needs to say, we're going to take it back. We're going to take it back, fix a date, 10 years from now, or actually probably sooner than that, because you're going to need to repurpose it. Build what the community needs in a way. In my perfect world, we would build we would build something there where you could have joint use by school and the community, where you could use it to kind of accelerate some of the other kinds of learning that we'd like to see at our secondary levels. Put a design lab in there, put a place where students could have internship placements, where they could connect with other members of our community. There's all kinds of fantastic things that we could do, but we need to figure out what's possible in that site. And what our community needs as a whole. So I think just pure delay is not going to be helpful to anybody. We're going to need the site, and we're going to need it. We're going to need it within 10 years.
I want to give you a chance to clarify and expand on your comments about the OCR Office for Civil Rights issues that have plagued the district for the last couple of years. As you know, in June, the school board unanimously adopted a resolution that basically accused the OCR of improprieties and then committed the district to, and I quote here, expand its pursuit of a just review and remedy of substantial OCR errors and of fair, prompt, and reviewable investigative practices through correspondence and meetings with elected representatives and Education Coalition affiliates. Back then in June, you told our reporter that commenting on that resolution would involve a great deal of speculation, which you called inappropriate and potentially unfair. Then in a recent statement that you made to Palo Alto Pulse, a website, you called it irresponsible to speculate and said that you couldn't determine, nor can the general public, the truth of the allegations in the resolution due to the confidentiality of the OCR proceedings. Then last week at the debate, you stated that you would have reluctantly voted to support the board's resolution if the allegations in the resolution were true. So I'm wondering if you could explain what allegations in the resolution you are referring to that your decision would turn on, and what is it that you think is unverifiable or not clear about them?
I'm glad that you asked, because I think it's important to talk about this. So what I said at the debate last week was consistent with what I'd said before, that the public does not have all the information on what happened. I'd spent a great deal of time looking at the public record, looking at the very long and detailed article that was published by the Weekly, by your wife, I believe, kind of detailing what we know, what we don't know. There were more than a dozen references to "we don't know," "remains to be seen," "information redacted." A lot of it has to do with the fact that there were closed meetings that shouldn't have been closed. Some of it has to do with the fact that there's confidential student information. So what I did say last week was, consistent with what I've said before, we do not know all of the information that's there. Some of the allegations that are in there that are of tremendous concern to me as an attorney, as a parent, as a taxpayer, are allegations that there was evidence tampering that was brought to the attention of the OCR by the district and that was not addressed. I was very concerned to see allegations that OCR was not complying with its own procedures. Justice delayed being justice denied, and long delays and failure to comply with its own procedures. Similarly, I was troubled, as I think probably most people would be troubled, by an allegation in there that said that in one of the findings, the OCR stated that the district had failed to take disciplinary action against a student in a bullying case, against a perpetrator, I imagine a bully in a bullying case. The district claims that it had suspended the student and that the district had brought that information to the OCR and asked the OCR to correct it, and that the OCR has not done so. As someone who has worked for social justice for 20 years, this is terrifically troubling to me. The OCR is an organization that needs to function well, needs to protect our kids. We need to cooperate absolutely, fully, and completely with the OCR. But to the extent that we see an issue of concern, I think that all of us share the concern. We want that agency to be functioning as well as it can. So in my view, what really needs to be discussed here is what I will do if I'm on the board. And if I'm on the board, what I will do is protect the rights of every student in our district. Be an absolute firm enforcer of all of our policies with respect to bullying and anti-discrimination, and see to it that the district does so as well. Be open and transparent at every turn. I will insist that the district provide regular reports to the public on what's going on with OCR. And at the bottom line, we need to make sure that every single student is protected.
How do you reconcile the district's action here with this resolution coming a year after it had originally raised concerns with OCR, which in turn was 5 months after they had actually received all the things that they ultimately are complaining about?
It would seem to me that what's happening there is probably a lack of organization. I'm speculating here too, kind of lack of organization, vision, and leadership by the board, perhaps. I do not know. Or maybe it has to do with the fact that that they had been waiting. Many of these allegations have to do with waiting for information from OCR, and they kept being told it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Again, this is if what the district says is true.
Well, you've seen, I assume, the statement of findings from OCR
Yes.
and the resolution agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those were dealt with in 2012 with legal counsel for the school district and were given to the school district in December of 2012. The district signed the resolution agreement. It wasn't until 5 months later that any expression of concern about any of the investigational practices or conclusions was raised. And in fact, in the meantime, statements were issued by the district apologizing for their behavior. At the middle school, the principal outlined all the changes that they were making because they realized they should have handled the situation better. So it sounds as though until 5 months later, when the board in secret decided to object to the entire investigation in the Terman case, they were sending all kinds of signals of mea culpa and apologies for what they had done. So it just doesn't all hang together. It's hard for me to see on what basis the district the board released all of the documents that it based its decision on the resolution. And they said that. They said, we're releasing these documents so that the public has an opportunity to comment on whether or not we should adopt this resolution. And what you're saying is that to comment would both be inappropriate and irresponsible.
So what I would say is you're expressing to me how baffled you are as to how they said mea culpa, then 5 months later. I'm as baffled as you are. I wasn't there. I wasn't part of it. There's thousands of pages of redacted documents. The weekly reporting has been extremely clear on saying we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, largely not because of any failing of the reporting, but because things happen behind closed doors, because there is absolutely no record, written or otherwise, of the conversations between the district and OCR staff, something that I find terribly problematic. So what I'm saying is, we don't know. It's irresponsible for me to say, based on information that I do not have and that the public doesn't have, what transpired there. The most important thing is that this district and the school board members need to be impeccably transparent and open and need to protect the rights of every student and need to cooperate with OCR. I believe more than anyone, after 20 years of working for social justice, that we need to have complete faith in our Office of Civil Rights and need to work with them. For the same reasons that when I was working as a domestic violence advocate and I was helping women in the court, where I would work with the courthouse when I said, there's issues with the procedures that you're following here to give these women protection orders. Can we figure out how we can have more timely processing of these temporary restraining orders? It's working with them because you want them to do their job to help the people you're trying to protect. This is the way the work is done. I believe more than anything that we need a strong civil rights organization.
Is there a reason why you didn't express any of these views to the board?
I did express views to the board. Do you mean in what way do you mean?
I don't believe you spoke before any board meetings on this topic. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nor did I see any correspondence. So you're raising it now, but I'm wondering where were you back when this issue was under consideration by the board?
I will say that I have talked personally to board members. In my view, I do not believe that some of the tone and tenor of these conversations were particularly productive. So what I'm feeling is there is much that has been said about this. I did not have all of the information. I do not have all the information now, and the public does not have all the information. The most important thing is, if you're trying to decide whether I should be on the board, is what I will do as a board member. And what I will do as a board member is not behave the way our current board did with allowing the superintendent to hide the ball, having all of those closed sessions, that's not the kind of way that I would be as a board member.
Okay, one last thing on this topic, and then we'll move on, and that has to do with your raising the evidence tampering allegation. Is that a responsible allegation to have been made by the board in public? It's a criminal accusation against a complainant against the school district and a district family. No evidence whatsoever has been released of what that meant or what it was.
If a criminal law has been broken and the school board knows about it, it is my belief that the school board has an obligation to raise that, particularly if we're talking about the civil rights of a child that need to be protected.
Raise it in a public accusation?
My understanding is that all of these matters had been raised with OCR. Is that true? I have no idea. But the district alleges that it had raised this issue with OCR. Again, the most important thing is not what I would have done if I had been there and had known the facts and had been part of the conversations that I was not part of, or if I had been privy to the confidential student information that was involved in that, presumably in that email.
I'm not asking about the details. I'm just asking you whether you feel it's appropriate for a school board to accuse an individual of a crime, evidence tampering, in public without offering one shred of evidence of that tampering.
I believe that they should be offering evidence for a claim that they make. I think that it is appropriate if they believe that a crime has been committed and that they have evidence of it. If I am on the school board and evidence of criminal activity comes to me and I want to raise it, I will back it up with evidence.
Okay.
So the quality of mathematics curriculum has been an area of great concern for many parents, especially since the somewhat controversial adoption of everyday math, the textbooks in 2009. So I'm curious if you are satisfied by the test scores and other data that's available that we're meeting the needs of all students on math.
So what I have learned through the everyday math struggle, which is what we went through in many ways as a district, is that one of the important results of that adoption was that we had a tremendous amount of teacher professional development that went on around math, which I think we universally, what I've heard from teachers, what I've heard from parents, what I've seen in student numbers is that that's been very helpful to have that level of teacher professional development. I think it was also extremely helpful to have all of the parent education sessions that went on. I was part of many of those as a parent in the elementary schools during that adoption. Some scores have gone up. Scores for, my understanding and looking at some of those scores, that scores for some of the higher achieving students either stagnated or went down. I think, again, this is a place where we need to do some serious evaluation. As we do our Common Core adoption, which is occurring right now, we need to think about what can we learn from the data that we've collected on the tests that we already have from everyday math, and how can we use that to inform the way we roll out Common Core math adoption?
I want to just briefly ask a follow-up on the English delaning proposal. I think it was last night or maybe it was last week, I can't remember. One of the forums you made reference to the process being one where you felt the superintendent hadn't adequately vetted that proposal before it came to the board. Can you expand on that? And what's the basis for that conclusion?
My understanding from what I read and what I heard him say is that that there were many unanswered questions that there were about the proposal at the time when it came to the board. Questions, for example, about the actual implementation, how differentiation would happen, how special ed students would be accommodated, how grading would happen, costs for any additional costs for any of this. All of those were questions that should have been worked out with the superintendent before that got to the board. All of those questions should have happened, leaving the teachers kind of hanging out there saying, we don't know, it would be nice to have. That's not a good process to follow.
Well, but Kevin, it was his recommendation to the board that that proposal be adopted. And what he said at the end of that discussion, which was at about 1 o'clock in the morning, as I recall, I want you as a board to give this department an opportunity to do this innovation, to do this program. The next thing that we know is that it's gone away. The board never did vote on it. So it had all the appearances of, at least to the public, that this had gone through the normal steps, that the English department had been working on it, it had gone to the curriculum group within the district, it had been endorsed by the principal, who had brought it to the superintendent, who had recommended it to the board.
Our superintendent often will be, who has a very positive attitude toward a number of things, will I think, be very positive about certain kinds of changes that he'd like to see. Sometimes then, when people would ask questions later, it would be clear that there were blanks that hadn't been filled in. In a situation like this, it behooves the board to make it really clear to the person it supervises, namely the superintendent, this is the information that we're going to need. This is the information that we're going to ask you for. These are the answers we're going to need to have. So don't bring something to us for a vote until you have those answers. So he brings it up. So where the fault of the communication is, I don't know. But all I know is we shouldn't have had a situation where there were fundamental questions coming from the board with respect to a proposal where the superintendent hadn't dealt with all of those in advance. It's really fundamental about you want to make sure that you're respectful of the people who are making a proposal and that you do everything. If you believe in a proposal and you want it to succeed, get the questions answered first, work it out, get the information, and then bring it for a vote.
And so there's a little difference of opinion among the candidates on this question of when something like this should really go to the board. And your view, as I recall, well, you tell us what your view is of should this proposal even come to the board?
Overall curricular policy is a matter that comes to the board. The details of what goes on in a classroom and the syllabus, absolutely not. That's the kind of thing that is absolutely staff work, not board work. I also think that, as I've said before, when you have something that makes fundamental differences between one high school and another, that's something, again, that you're going to want to give particular scrutiny.
So the answer is?
The answer is that's a board decision.
Okay, so even though it was a test program, a pilot program, that any pilot program at any school should come to the board? Where would you draw that line, I guess? That's
something that's fairly fundamental. For example, if somebody wants to create a makerspace at Barron Park, that's not a board decision. That's a little pilot that doesn't affect fundamental curricular decisions, and that's not board level. This is making a policy decision, and to me, that's a board level decision. Also, if you're going to do a pilot, you should be committing resources to evaluate it. And because you've got a commitment of resources to evaluate it, again, that's a reason why I think that should be a board decision.
Wasn't that part of this proposal that it go through an evaluation after the?
Yes.
Yeah.
And which is one of the reasons why I think it's board level.
Yeah. And how would you have voted on it?
I don't think it was ripe. So ask me once all of the information and all those questions are answered, and we make sure that we've heard fully from all members of, well, I shouldn't say all members of the special ed community, but from a broad swath of special ed community members who have raised very significant questions, then let's see where it goes.
What does your gut tell you, though, about the arguments that apparently are supported at least by some of the research that at that grade level in a topic like English, there's a benefit to having a very diverse classroom?
So having a very diverse classroom is a tremendous benefit. There is also research that shows that differentiating by ability can be extremely helpful to kids at the lower end, in the middle, and at the top. So there's countervailing research. The main thing, though, and what I think is most important, is we need to do a really close examination of the problems that we're trying to solve for and tailor our solutions to the problems at hand. For example, one of the things that was stated in this particular discussion was that there were very capable students who tested proficient who were nonetheless in 9 instead of 9A. So why is that? Is that if the problem is that either the students didn't know or the parents didn't know, or there were incorrectly low expectations of students based, for example, on the color of their skin, well, then that's a combination of a teacher advisor issue, a parent education issue, and a teacher professional development issue. That's where you need to go. So what I'm saying is tailor your solutions to the problems that you have. My inclination is that we need to make sure that we address whatever issues we have, say with achievement gap, head on, and that we deal with them based on what problems we're trying to solve for.
About counseling?
Oh yeah. So last night, you one of your question, the other candidate, was about differences between the Gunn and Pally counseling programs, and you said you were sort of interested in seeing how various small changes were going to play out there. And I'm curious if you have an idea what kind of evaluation plan you could put in place to look at those two programs, and then what you might do with the data in terms of, do you expand Pally's, do you change both of them, do you not merge them, but what would you do with data from that?
Well, there's a few different questions that are embedded in there. Let's see if I can tease some of them out. The district has created some kind of a logic model for its guidance programs, which I think is great, although it's very difficult. It's very difficult to see exactly what that in fact represents. Generally speaking, what I would do as an evaluator is I would document what it is that we're doing, the logic behind it, and I would use that as a basis for an evaluation. In order to set up an evaluation, you want to say, where are you trying to go? How are you know that you're going to get there? How are you going to collect the data to show that you're there, the indicators that you're moving along that path? And then you create a plan for action based on what you learn. With respect to the changes at Gunn, I don't know that they were necessarily made with a clear view to exactly what you're trying to do, but to the extent that we do have goals there, you want to evaluate against those. With respect to the question about, do you turn it into Pally, we need to step back and say, what do we want guidance to look like for our students so it meets the needs of our students as we see them, and so it achieves the goals. I feel at this point like if we look at the data, we see wide dissatisfaction by students with counseling in both schools. We need to figure out how are we going to make counseling better and make the social emotional health of our students better in both schools. At Gunn, I think that what you'd want to do, well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about what you do about the additional counselors, and there's additional counselors, they separated out college and career, they've done a number of different things, which I think are very interesting first steps.
So just to be clear, given that you're identifying unhappiness with both systems, is your goal as a school board member to get to the point where we decide what the best counseling system is for our district and put it in place at both schools, or not? It's hard to get people to clearly define where this line is between a district program and desired outcomes.
And I think it's a fair question. In the ideal world, you would be able to get to a point where you could have the same outcomes at both schools while allowing some room for individual site-based kind of autonomy based on the culture of the school. But if you get to the point where, you just aren't going to get to those equal outcomes, you're not going to be able to do it if you let that kind of individuation go, and it deals with something that has to do with something fundamental like student safety, health, and welfare, then I do think that you want to say as a school board, we need to figure out how we're going to get to a place where we have equity between those schools.
So the answer I'm hearing is no, we don't. Your goal isn't to have one counseling system that we implement at both schools.
No, what I'm saying is, ideally, I think that would be great. If we could figure out what do our students need.
What's the goal? What's your goal?
My goal is every single one of our students feels that they have a counseling system that is accessible to them, that meets their needs, that gives them the information that they want both on their academics and their kind of social emotional health and on college and career readiness.
Okay, well, so you're going to take a survey every year to see if every student thinks that their counseling program met those requirements? That's impossible. So what I'm asking for is are you as a board member looking for, to use this example as a district policy, because this isn't student health or safety, this is something much different than that. It's not a legal mandate, it doesn't fall into that bucket that you've described earlier. So is the goal, is the preference, is what you're hoping for, is a common system or common outcomes?
In my perfect world, we'd have both, but I think that in reality, we are probably going to get more toward common outcomes.
Okay.
But we need to really, really make sure that those outcomes are common.
Which puts a lot of work on the evaluation end of it, and a lot of room for disagreement and debate, which is what we've been through for how many years now on this subject?
Yeah.
We're running out of time. I want to just ask you, hopefully, very quick responses on a couple of things. The bullying policies that were adopted, you're probably one of the candidates that can address that since you have a legal background, is a bifurcated policy, whereas special classes of students are handled differently from run-of-the-mill students. Is that the policy that you would have supported had you expressed a view on it when it was underway?
I think ideally we would want to protect all students at a high standard. We should have zero tolerance for bullying and discrimination, period.
That's not really the question.
Okay.
It's not a question of tolerance. It's a question of what should the procedures be. And as adopted, we have employed different procedures for protected classes than non-protected classes. And there was a big year-long debate over this. So what I'm asking is, and it goes against the recommendations of the School Board Association. So what I'm asking is, which of those two alternatives did you support?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So I think that we should have a higher standard for all students, period. Non-bifurcated system.
So you disagree with what was adopted?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Also, building on your legal experience, I'm wondering if you had been on the board and the Phil Winston matter had come before you, would you have voted differently from the board in deciding whether to terminate him or not?
This is another one of those situations where it is very clear that there is a tremendous amount of information that is not fully available to the public. When I read about the Phil Winston situation, I was dumbfounded. I was horrified by that situation. In my personal view, I do not think that someone who has been found to be a sexual harasser on multiple occasions, I don't think that person should be teaching in a classroom.
What information do you feel is missing? Because the district released all of its investigative.
They released. I don't have the full personnel file on him. So, but
they released the information on which they based their decision.
Yes, they did. But again, I don't have his full personnel file. But what I'm telling you is that based on what I know, I do not think, just as a matter of principle, kind of looking forward in the future, I'm not going to opine on things that I don't know about the past. In the future, I will tell you that I do not think that people who have been found to be sexual harassers should be in a classroom, period.
Okay. Big shift here to a 13th elementary school. Quickly, everybody seems to agree we need one, but there seems to be some difference of opinion about how urgent that need is. And I heard you saying that we've got time to have a community engagement process on this issue. The board has already numerous times engaged the public and itself in discussions about this 13th elementary school. What more are you looking for in that process, and how soon do you want it to happen?
I think that we need to have the process soon, and it needs to feed in. What needs to be fed into it is our current enrollment numbers, which are flat for elementary school. We don't know what the number they were last year. They're flat this year. But the other thing that I want to have part of that conversation is where 13th Elementary School fits into the larger discussions about Cubberley and about what our vision is for our middle schools. Because we make these decisions piecemeal, and it's, to use the analogy, the head bone's connected to the neck bone. We need to think, what is our vision as a district? What do we want to do? Any time that we commit to a particular site for one purpose, it means we're not using it for another. Anytime we commit dollars for one purpose, it's dollars that we're not putting to another use. So where we cite that 13th elementary school is going to impact what ends up happening with respect to some of those other things. Also feeding into that is what happens with immersion programs. There's a tremendous amount of interest in expanding connections. You know, there's all kinds of building site facility decisions that impact one another, and I'd like to have a conversation that is not siloed just about elementary school.
This district and this city aren't good at complicated decision making like that. When was the last time you saw something that involved that many elements take fewer than 5 years?
Well, hope springs eternal, and what I'd like to say is that if I'm on the board, I'm oriented toward action. I'm oriented toward shorter meetings, more decisions, better direction, and then following up on we ask for information, we get actionable information, we act on the actionable information.
So when is your goal of opening a 13th elementary school? When do you want to have it open? By what school year?
Right now,
we can work backwards
right.
process-wise.
So right now the budget has it about 5 years out. So
the budget.
Okay.
I mean, that's just a matter of voting to put it in next year's budget. I mean, that's not a constraint.
So we're taking out the constraints of where we are. I think that ideally, since we'd have to have a couple of years, we'd have to have time for planning, a couple of years to build out the space. I would say probably in about 3 years.
And that would be your goal. I mean, that's what you'd like to see.
I think so.
Okay.
That's to open it.
Right. I think we better stop there because I think we pretty much used up the time. So let me just end by giving you the opportunity to summarize in any way you want to your candidacy, maybe in a minute or so. You've done this so many times now that you probably have it down pretty well.
I've done it so many times, probably nobody wants to hear it anymore. But the thing that I want to emphasize the most is that working for children, working for our students is my life's work. It's what I've done professionally. It's what I've done in my volunteer time. It's something that I am deeply committed to and something that I bring a tremendous amount of skill to from a number of different avenues. This is a job that I would take very seriously. I think that it would be a real honor to be able to serve this district, and I think that this moment right now, where we have all of these changes and this new superintendent, we have Common Core, this is a moment where we can do something really impactful. And what I want to do with more than anything else is to maximize the potential of every single student in our district.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.